Hi guys, how old are you? I'd love to see the age range of our viewers. Write your age below.
You're not invited. It's just for high achievers this year. That was the whole message. No Merry Christmas, no explanation, not even a damn emoji to soften the slap in the face. It came through just after I parked in front of the post office, sitting in my car with a box of gifts for Darren's kids in the back seat, each wrapped with stupid little name tags I'd handwrote to make them feel personal. I just stared at the screen for a full minute, blinking as if maybe I'd read it wrong, or maybe it was a joke I wasn't in on. But it wasn't. He meant it. My little brother, Darren, the same one I'd bailed out of 4 different crises in the last 10 years. From hospital bills to helping them not get evicted when his wife got laid off, had just uninvited me from Christmas dinner with a line that made it sound like I wasn't good enough to sit at his family's table. I should explain something before you start making judgments about whether I overreacted. I'm 51, divorced, no kids by choice, not because I couldn't, but because I never found the kind of partnership that made me want to take that leap. I own my home outright, have a solid job in accounting, and yeah, maybe I'm not rolling in cash, but I've always been generous, especially with family, especially with Darren. He was 6 years younger than me and the golden child in a very strange way. Not because he earned it, but because our mom always framed him as the one who just needed a little more support to reach his potential. That line became gospel in our house. So when he dropped out of community college, it wasn't his fault. It was because he had to work too much. When he crashed our parents' car at 19, it was because I should have been watching him. When he got his girlfriend pregnant at 22 and couldn't afford diapers, guess who was guilted into helping out just for a few months? Me. That was nearly 2 decades ago. And those few months turned into a quiet, steady stream of money I sent them every month. Some of it went to rent, some to utilities, some directly to the kids' school fees or medical bills. I told myself it was for the kids, and it was. But if I'm being brutally honest, the kind of honest that only comes when you're slapped in the face like I was with that text, I think part of me did it because I still thought I could earn a seat at that table. Not just the dinner table, the metaphorical one, the family table, the one where Darren got praised for showing up at Thanksgiving with a pie he didn't even bake, while I was the one bringing bags of groceries and still getting told I should smile more. It was never about the money. It was about being needed, being seen. So that afternoon, sitting in my car, I opened my banking app. My hand shook a little, not because I was scared, but because it felt like some part of me was about to break loose. I found the recurring transfer labeled Darren Family Support. $200 first of every month, set up 5 years ago like clockwork. I clicked Cancel Recurring. A warning popped up. Are you sure you want to stop this payment? And I actually laughed. Out loud, loud enough that the woman in the next car glanced over. Yeah, I was sure. I hit yes, then sat there staring at the screen again, thinking of everything I'd given them. Not just money, but peace of mind. They never had to worry about heat in winter because I covered the difference when they couldn't. They didn't have to pay overdraft fees because I deposited little spot amounts when their checks bounced. And apparently, all of that still didn't qualify me as a high achiever in Darren's eyes. But here's where it really started to sting. And maybe you'll relate to this if you've ever had someone throw your kindness back in your face. It wasn't just that he didn't want me there. It was the smugness, the assumption that he could say something that cutting and I'd just take it, like I always did. Like when he borrowed my car in college and returned it with a dent and no gas and said, "Well, you shouldn't have parked it there." Like when he forgot my birthday 4 years in a row and blamed it on being too busy with real life. Like every single time he needed something and I came running, and he never once followed up with a thank you card or a phone call that wasn't about another favor. I knew right then that this wasn't about the text. It was about the years before it. The text was just the final straw, the permission I needed to cut the damn cord. And as cold as it sounds, it felt good. Really good. Like I'd finally stopped trying to buy my way into a family that never wanted me on equal terms. Still, something in me, that nagging little voice that always tried to keep the peace, told me maybe I should wait. Maybe he'd apologize. Maybe it was just a bad joke. So I gave it 2 days. Didn't say a word. I dropped off the gifts at the post office anyway. No return address. I figured the kids shouldn't suffer because their dad was a jackass. But the apology never came. What did come was a photo on Facebook. Darren, his wife Mel, their kids, and 2 of their neighbors. Around a giant table with a roast and a caption that said, "Great night with the family. So proud of our little crew. No negativity allowed." I wasn't tagged, but I didn't need to be. That was when I knew this wasn't an accident. It was a message. I wasn't part of their picture anymore. So I sent him one text, just 5 words. "Support stopped. Good luck, Darren." And that was it. No calls, no drama, not yet anyway. But let me ask you something. If someone used you for years, then tossed you aside like you were never part of the plan, would you still feel guilty for finally cutting them off? Because I did, not a lot, but enough to wonder if I'd made a mistake. Turns out, I hadn't even scratched the surface. 2 weeks later, Darren showed up at my front door, and he wasn't knocking, he was pounding. For the first week after I canceled the monthly transfer, there was nothing but silence, which in some ways felt louder than anything else Darren could have sent my way, because deep down, I knew he had noticed. I knew the absence of money was a kind of message, one that couldn't be misread or ignored, and still he said nothing, no call, no text, not even one of his passive-aggressive "hope you're doing well" kinds of messages that usually preceded a new favor or excuse. It was a vacuum, a blank space where the pattern had been, and that space, that emptiness, told me more than words could have. It told me that I had finally stepped outside the role I'd been playing my whole life, and that he didn't yet know how to respond without losing the upper hand. But I didn't have to wait long to see the fallout. The silence broke not with a phone call from Darren, but with something far more telling. A post on Mel's Facebook page, a blurry photo of a half-eaten casserole, and a caption that read, "When you realize some people only support you when they can control you, blessings come when you least expect them." The comment section lit up with their friends chiming in, all the usual cheerleaders who never once showed up to help when the kids were sick or the car needed repairs, all of them offering likes, hearts, and those empty platitudes that people throw around online like emotional coupons. You don't need that negativity. Cutting ties is healthy. Onward and upward. I didn't respond. I didn't comment. I didn't even take a screenshot. What I did instead was lean back in my kitchen chair with a glass of cheap Merlot and stare at the screen, the red glow from my laptop casting this weird, almost theatrical light across the room. And I realized something that felt both liberating and pathetic. I had spent years thinking I was part of that family, not just Darren's sister, but a quiet pillar holding up their day-to-day lives. And now, with one decision, they'd rewritten me out of the story, without even bothering to change the plot. I'd gone from benefactor to villain in less than 10 days. But the truly revealing part came a few days later, when I got a call. Not from Darren, not from Mel, but from my 13-year-old niece Gracie. Her voice cracked just slightly when she said, "Aunt Karen, do you know why the internet's not working?" And I wanted to say something comforting, something responsible, something that would explain adult decisions in a way that wouldn't make her feel like she was collateral damage in a family war. But all I could manage was, "No, sweetie, I don't." "Have you asked your dad?" She paused for a moment, long enough for me to hear that uncomfortable shuffle of someone trying to figure out what they're allowed to say. And then she mumbled, "He said you messed everything up." That sentence didn't feel like a punch. It felt like a scalpel, clean and precise, because even though I expected backlash, I hadn't expected him to use his kids as shields, hadn't expected him to plant the idea in their heads that my refusal to keep paying meant I was punishing them, not holding him accountable. That was when I knew this was going to get worse before it got better. The full storm didn't hit until 4 days later, on a Saturday afternoon, when I was in the middle of reorganizing my garage, trying to do something, anything, to burn off the gnawing tension that had set up shop in my chest. I was halfway through dragging a box of old tax files across the concrete when I heard the banging, Not knocking, not the polite kind of thud you hear from a neighbor or a delivery guy, but a full-on fist-to-door pounding that echoed through the walls like someone trying to break in. I froze for a second, because even before I opened it, I knew. Something about the rhythm of the hits. Desperate, angry, familiar, and sure enough, there he was, Darren, standing on my porch, his face red, not just from the cold, but from the kind of fury that has nowhere left to go. His jaw was tight, his eyes wild, his hair looked like it hadn't seen a comb in 3 days. And before I could even say a word, he shouted, "You think you're better than us? You think cutting us off makes you righteous?" I didn't flinch. I didn't invite him in, I didn't even reach for my coat. I just stood there, half inside, half out, the threshold between us like a line I'd finally dared to draw. "You told me I wasn't welcome," I said, voice steady, calm, maybe even cruel. "I'm just respecting your decision." That pushed him over the edge. He launched into a tirade so tangled and contradictory, I couldn't even catch every piece of it. Accusations of betrayal, claims that I owed them for how hard life was growing up, a bizarre mention of our mother, and how she always said you'd find a way to abandon us in the end. I stood there and let him burn through it, the fire of his resentment licking up years of buried jealousy and entitlement. And when he finally paused, panting slightly, I asked the one question I'd never asked before, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I wanted to hear him lie to my face. "Darren," I said, "in the last 15 years, how much money do you think I've given you?" He blinked, paused, shifted his weight. "I don't know, a few grand?" I laughed, not loud, not mocking, just enough to let him know that the performance was over. "It's over $26,000, I said, each syllable like a gavel hit. "And you never said thank you, not once." His face twitched. For a second, just one fleeting moment, I saw something that almost looked like shame, but it passed, replaced by something darker. "You don't get to pretend you're the victim," he growled. "You owe Mom everything. You think you're some kind of saint? You're a bitter, lonely woman with no kids and no legacy, and without us, you have no one." And that right there was the crack, the place where the truth started to bleed through, because what he didn't know, what I hadn't even told myself until that moment, was that he was right about one thing. I didn't have anyone else, but I sure as hell wasn't going to spend the rest of my life paying for the privilege of being unwanted. I didn't slam the door, I didn't scream back. I simply looked at him. My little brother, red-faced, shaking, standing on my porch in borrowed pride, and I said, "Then I guess we're both about to find out who we really are without each other." Then I closed the door, and behind it, something inside me finally cracked open. When Darren hurled those words at me, "You owe Mom everything," they didn't sting right away. They just sat there like a shard of glass buried deep under skin, invisible to the eye, but sharp enough to start the slow bleeding the moment you move. And for the next 2 days, I tried to pretend I wasn't wounded, that I hadn't flinched inwardly, that I didn't wake up at 3 in the morning with those words echoing in my skull like the ticking of a bomb I hadn't realized was still buried beneath the floorboards of my memory. It wasn't just a line meant to hurt. It was a window into something I hadn't fully examined in years, something I had swallowed so long ago that I'd stopped questioning whether it was even real. Because if I'm being brutally honest, the kind of honesty you only come to when you're forced to hold up a mirror so close it blinds you, I had spent most of my adult life believing a version of our family story that was quietly, steadily curated by our mother. A story in which I was the responsible one, the one with a good job and no real problems. And Darren was the unlucky one, the boy who had promise but never the resources, who needed my help because life had dealt him a harder hand. I played along with that story, not just because it felt noble, but because it gave my sacrifices a kind of moral clarity. If I was the successful sibling, then helping him wasn't weakness, it was duty, it was love. But what if the story was a lie? That thought came to me on the second night after Darren's doorstep meltdown. when I was sitting alone in the guest room I'd converted into a makeshift office, a space that still smelled faintly of old paper and lemon disinfectant, and I found myself reaching for the dusty box of old financial records I'd kept. Not because I thought I'd ever need them, but because some part of me had always been a little too meticulous to throw them out. At first, I was only looking to confirm the amount I'd given Darren over the years, trying to total it up for my own sanity. But the deeper I dug, the more I started finding things that didn't line up, little inconsistencies that whispered of something bigger. A phone bill charged to my name from an address I never lived at. A credit card application I didn't remember filling out during a year when I was between jobs and too cautious to open new accounts. I should have stopped there. I should have closed the box, poured another glass of wine, and convinced myself that I was just being paranoid, that memory is faulty and paperwork messy, and nothing was really out of place. But something in me, that quiet, trembling voice that doesn't scream but nags, told me to keep going, so I did. And what I found, buried in a manila envelope between my 2008 tax return and an old utility bill, was a collection of documents I had never seen before. A store credit card, opened in my name, but sent to our mother's address. A bank overdraft notice from a joint account I didn't remember opening. And, most damning of all, a loan application from a predatory lender that had my social security number, my birth date, and Darren's signature forged at the bottom. I stared at those pages for what felt like hours, trying to process what it meant, trying to wrap my head around the implications. Because this wasn't just theft. This was family. This was betrayal wearing the face of a woman who raised me and a brother I thought I was saving. And suddenly, all those years of quietly footing the bill, of letting things slide, of swallowing my pride for the sake of keeping the peace, they weren't kindnesses. They were consequences. Consequences of a lie that started long before that text about high achievers. It was my mother. I remembered things differently now. Her hushed phone calls in the hallway, the way she always brushed off questions with "Don't worry about it, honey, it's just easier this way." The times she needed me to co-sign things just for now. I'd trusted her because she was my mother, because you're supposed to. But what if she had built the foundation of our family not on love or sacrifice, but on manipulation? The worst part wasn't discovering the fraud. The worst part was realizing I had been complicit in it, that I had willingly carried the weight of other people's mistakes for years without ever asking why, that I had convinced myself I was the strong one, when in truth, I was just the silent one, the compliant one, the sister who said yes because no one else would. And maybe Darren's rage, misplaced as it was, had been rooted in a deeper truth. Maybe he wasn't just angry because I cut him off. Maybe he was angry because in doing so, I finally broke the unspoken agreement we all had, that I would keep playing my role, that I would never question the script. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my desk, the documents spread out in front of me like evidence at a trial that hadn't even begun, and I knew what I had to do next. I had to talk to someone who could confirm the fraud, someone who could help me figure out how deep it went. So I called Mark, an old colleague from the credit union where I used to work, someone who'd always said, "If you ever want to dig into something shady, I'm your guy." His voice was warm, curious, casual. "Karen, long time, what's up?" And I said with a calm I didn't feel, "You ever help someone file identity theft when the thief was family?" There was a pause, not long, just enough to let me know he understood. "I can help," he said, "but once you open this door, you don't get to close it again." And as I sat there, staring at the paperwork that had redrawn the shape of my childhood, I knew I wasn't going to close anything. Not now, not ever again. There's a certain kind of clarity that settles over you in the days after you've uncovered a lie, so big it redefines your understanding of everything that came before it. A kind of quiet, steel-edged calm that isn't the absence of emotion, but the moment when emotion finally gives way to resolve, when anger cools and sharpens into something far more dangerous. certainty, and in the days following my discovery of the forged signatures and the loans taken out in my name, certainty was all I had. Because while part of me still recoiled at the thought of taking legal action against my own family, a larger, louder part of me had finally stepped into the light and realized that justice, real justice, wasn't about vengeance or teaching a lesson. It was about reclaiming something I had lost so long ago I hadn't even realized it was missing: my dignity. I spent the next few days assembling everything: every document, every transfer receipt, every email and vague promise and unanswered message I'd archived over the years, every shred of proof that my trust hadn't just been broken, but deliberately exploited. Not by strangers or some faceless institution, but by the two people who should have been the first to protect it: my brother and our mother. I pulled bank statements, took photos of old mail, cross-checked account numbers, and traced timelines until my dining room table looked like a war room, and I was no longer just a woman nursing a grudge, but a woman preparing for something far more personal. Not a battle, but a reckoning. But here's the thing about family: no matter how prepared you think you are, no matter how fortified or logical or righteous you feel, there's always that tiny part of you, that treacherous, sentimental sliver, that hopes, irrationally and against all evidence, that maybe, just maybe, the people you love will do the right thing before you're forced to make them. So I gave Darren one last chance. I texted him on December 23rd, just 2 days before the Christmas dinner that I was so spectacularly uninvited from, and told him I wanted to meet, not to fight, not to dredge up the past, but to talk, privately, just the two of us, and try, if not to fix things, then at least to lay them bare. He agreed, almost too quickly, and I knew immediately that he thought he had the upper hand again. That he assumed I was reaching out because I regretted cutting him off, that I was offering a white flag, not a warning. And in a way, that worked to my advantage, because when he arrived at my house the next night, hair slicked back, coat too thin for the weather, a smug little smile playing at the corners of his mouth, I didn't greet him with warmth or nostalgia, or even the tired affection of someone trying to preserve a blood tie. I greeted him like a woman with nothing left to lose. We sat in the living room, the air between us thick with old grievances and new calculations, and I didn't waste time. I laid the documents out on the coffee table in slow, deliberate sequence: the credit card application, the forged loan agreement, the co-signed lease I never agreed to, the history of payments, the messages I had sent begging for updates and getting silence in return. He glanced at them, at first casually, then with increasing discomfort, his body language shifting in subtle, involuntary ways. The leg bouncing, the jaw tightening, the way he suddenly couldn't meet my eyes. "You forged my signature," I said, voice low and clear, without accusation but with undeniable weight. "You used my name, my credit, my stability, and then you erased me when I wasn't convenient anymore." He didn't deny it. That was the part that hit hardest. He didn't even try. Instead, he leaned back, folded his arms, and said, "It was Mom's idea. She said you'd never notice. You had the money. You weren't using it." I wish I could say I was shocked, or hurt, or even surprised. But all I felt in that moment was exhaustion. The kind that doesn't just settle in your bones, but drapes itself over your entire being like wet cement. Because I finally understood that Darren hadn't just taken advantage of me. He had been taught to, trained to, enabled, and excused and coddled by a woman who spent her whole life convincing the world that she was protecting her son, when all she was doing was sheltering him from consequence. "So that's it?" I asked. "You just thought I'd never find out? Or you thought I'd forgive you when I did?" He shrugged. "You always do. You need us." And that sentence, more than anything else, was the moment the last thread snapped. Because it wasn't just arrogance, it was certainty. He believed, truly believed, that I needed him, that my role in our dynamic was so fixed, so predictable, that I'd always come back, always soften, always bail him out. But not this time. I opened the folder beside me, pulled out a single sheet of paper, the police report I'd already filled out but hadn't yet submitted, and laid it in front of him. This goes to the station tomorrow unless I have written confirmation from you by end of day admitting everything in your own words. I won't send it to the kids, I won't make it public, but I will make it real. He stared at the paper, then at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in his eyes. Not panic, not bluster, but real, quiet fear. The kind that sets in when a man realizes he's not dealing with the same version of a woman he's manipulated for years. You wouldn't, he said. I already did, I lied. This copy's just for you. He left without another word. No storming, no shouting, just silence. That same silence he'd used for years to punish, to manipulate, to make me chase apologies and explanations. But this time, I let it sit. The Christmas dinner came and went. I spent the evening alone, not sad, not triumphant, just still. I didn't turn on the TV, I didn't drink. I didn't scroll through photos of other people's smiling families and compare them to mine. I simply sat in my own house, in my own space, with the weight of my choices spread out before me like old scars finally acknowledged. And for the first time in my adult life, I didn't feel guilty for saying no. I felt free. But freedom, I would soon learn, isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of the price you pay for finally choosing yourself. There's something unsettling, almost eerie, about the quiet that follows a confrontation you've spent years avoiding. Like the calm after a hurricane when everything is still, too still, and you're left standing among the wreckage with nothing but the sound of your own breath and the knowledge that nothing will ever look or feel quite the same again. In the days following my conversation with Darren, that silence settled over my life like fog. Thick, suffocating, and impossible to escape. And even though I had gotten exactly what I wanted, even though I had taken control, confronted the past, and finally drawn a line that couldn't be crossed, there was no joy in it, no catharsis, no cinematic swell of victory. There was just stillness. And in that stillness, I was forced to confront the truth I had avoided for far too long. That winning doesn't always feel like freedom. And sometimes peace demands a cost that's harder to pay than any financial debt. Darren never sent the written confession I asked for. He didn't reply to my message, didn't text, didn't call, didn't even try to twist the narrative or shift the blame the way he always had in the past. He disappeared, not literally, but emotionally, mentally, digitally, like someone who understood, perhaps for the first time, that the game had changed, that the board had been flipped, and the pieces scattered so far apart they could never be arranged the same way again. And while part of me kept waiting for an apology, a fight, a last-minute plea for mercy, another part of me began to realize that this absence, this sudden and total retreat, was the closest thing to an acknowledgement I would ever get. The silence stretched on for weeks, and in that time, I found myself replaying everything, not just the recent events, but the whole tapestry of our relationship, the years of small betrayals and subtle manipulations, the way our mother had woven a narrative that made Darren the underdog, and me the overachiever, the reliable fallback, the unthanked safety net. I remembered birthdays forgotten, favors exploited, kindnesses twisted into obligations, and I began to see it all with new eyes. Not the eyes of a woman trying to make peace with her family, but the eyes of someone who had finally stopped making excuses for everyone else's dysfunction. And yet, in the quiet, something else emerged. Not regret, not sadness exactly, but a kind of grief I hadn't expected. Grief for the family I thought I had. Grief for the years I spent trying to earn love that was always conditional. Grief for the version of myself who had been too afraid to ask what she was worth without the role she had been assigned. I missed the illusion even as I dismantled it, because illusions, as toxic as they can be, are sometimes easier to live with than the truth. Then, about a month after that final conversation, a message arrived. It wasn't from Darren, it was from his daughter, Gracie, my niece, the same girl who had called me about the Wi-Fi, the one whose voice had cracked with confusion and quiet worry. It was a short message, typed in a way that made me instantly recognize the hesitance behind each word. Aunt Karen, I found some stuff, old papers, Mom and Dad never told me, but I just wanted to say, you did the right thing. I don't know what's going to happen next, but I know they lied to you. And to me. Reading that, something inside me broke open in the gentlest, most devastating way. Not because it was vindication, but because it was the first moment of truth I had received from anyone in that family who hadn't used honesty as a weapon. It wasn't just an acknowledgement. It was a thread, a fragile, flickering connection that told me not everything I gave had been well wasted. Not every part of my story would be twisted or lost. That maybe, just maybe, some part of the next generation would see me not as the bitter, childless aunt with boundaries, but as someone who had tried, who had given more than she should have, and finally, when enough was enough, chose to stop bleeding for people who mistook her arteries for ATM machines. In the weeks that followed, I did what most people never get around to. I rewrote my will. I changed the beneficiaries on every document, removed Darren and his family from any inheritance or access, and set up a scholarship fund for first-generation college students in my county, one that would be administered anonymously and awarded to kids like Gracie, who needed support without strings, encouragement without expectation, love without the weight of shame or guilt. It was the only way I could think of to turn the years of giving into something that might actually heal instead of haunt. I also did something harder. I deleted Darren's number, permanently. Not because I thought he wouldn't reach out again someday, perhaps in desperation or nostalgia, but because I needed to sever the line completely, to close the circuit and end the cycle. He had made his choices, so had I. And even though I didn't feel angry anymore, even though the storm had passed, I knew better than to stand beneath the clouds again hoping they'd change. Now, months later, when people ask me about my family, I pause. I tell them I have a niece I adore. I tell them I had a brother once, and that we don't talk. I don't explain. I don't defend. I simply exist in the space I've carved out for myself, one that's quieter, lonelier at times, but infinitely more honest. And sometimes, late at night, I sit on the porch with a cup of tea and I think about what Darren said, that I have no legacy, no one of my own, no one to grieve me when I'm gone. And I smile, not because he was right, but because he was wrong in the most important way. My legacy isn't blood. It isn't family dinners or birthday calls or forced forgiveness. It's the moment I chose to stop paying for love that was never real and start building a life that finally was.